So, welcome to Cure Hypertension. Reverse high blood pressure in 90 minutes, or at least learn the skills to make it happen. So, this is me, Dave Donohue. I'm Delaware Region's only board certified lifestyle medicine physician. And as a lifestyle medicine physician and an internist, I practice the best that evidence-based allopathic medicine and lifestyle medicine have to offer. And I strive to take people off medicines more than actually starting medicines. I'm proud to be a part of Progressive Health of Delaware. It's a great group of people, and we are really blessed to have, in my opinion, a wonderful group of folks, including 4 lifestyle-focused physicians, 3 fantastic physician assistants and nurse practitioners, and not to mention Karen Smith, our registered dietitian, who helped me a whole lot with this presentation. So why are we doing this? Well, there's a lot of information I want to get out there to people with high blood pressure, stuff that I find from the science that I read and I think, you know, everybody with high blood pressure should know this. It turns out there's a lot of that stuff, and I don't have time to work it all into a half-hour meeting with you. So the goal here is to be able to get all that key information out to every single person who has high blood pressure. And the other reason why I want to do this is because yakety 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 yak. I get tired of hearing myself talk. I have to say the same thing over and over to everybody. This way is much more efficient if I can broadcast the message once and get it out to everybody. So today we're going to ask a lot of questions and try to answer those questions. Some fundamental questions like, what is hypertension and why is it important? What does the science say about how it can be reversed? Also, I'm going to share with you a lot of key behaviors and skills that you could develop. I see making healthy changes in your life to be an act of skill building. And so I am going to highlight all the different skills that I show in the course of this presentation with this symbol that you see to the left. And we're going to share with you skills like how to make blood pressure lowering meals, how to sleep and move and breathe better. What are the healthiest supplements you might consider taking? First, I want to talk about safety. High blood pressure is a dangerous condition. High blood pressure can get you in years. Whereas low blood pressure can get you right now. So low blood pressure can be deadly very, very quickly. So a warning to everybody, if you do make some significant lifestyle changes, such as suddenly eating a much healthier diet or suddenly exercising a whole lot more, this can be, it's like taking a powerful medicine, and it can have very significant effects on your life. So if you get a big enough dose of healthy lifestyle, it can lower your blood pressure to a dangerous extent, or your blood sugar to a dangerous extent if you're on medications at the same time. So it's possible you might need less medicine. And I want to be very clear about this. This could be you. And this does happen to our patients. When people make big lifestyle changes and they're on a blood pressure medicine, suddenly they get dizzy, they pass out, they almost pass out. And it's because their blood pressure gets too low. Similarly, if they're on blood sugar medications and they make these big lifestyle changes, their sugar can get dangerously low, life-threateningly low. So I request you that you do, if you follow some of the advice in this program, and if you do make some big changes, I would encourage you, please, everybody, check your blood pressure daily, especially when you're making the big changes. Check it at least daily. Make sure you know your risk of low blood pressure. The people who are at particular risk are those who are on blood pressure medicines and have pretty low blood pressure already. Please make an appointment with your doctor to discuss safety and the medications. And and I should say doctor or provider. And please watch for signs of low blood pressure. And those signs are tiredness, lightheadedness, passing out. Special safety considerations. If you're on warfarin, a boost in vegetables, particularly dark green leafy vegetables, can reduce the effectiveness of warfarin. If you're on insulin or other diabetes medicines, again, a healthy lifestyle can drop your blood sugar dangerously low. And if you start doing vigorous exercise, that could be dangerous too, especially if you have unknown, undiagnosed coronary disease. Also, you can hurt yourself running suddenly. So we recommend easy does it. We ease into these things. So what is high blood pressure? Well, this is a new characterization of blood pressure from the American Heart Association. And the new thing is that we define normal blood pressure has got to be less than 120 systolic, the top number, and less than 80 diastolic. So we used to think of 120 over 80 as pretty normal, but it turns out you get into those 120s systolic, the top number, and that's called elevated blood pressure now. And if your blood pressure gets up into the 130s, we now call that hypertension. So let's be clear. I'm going to use interchangeably the words high blood pressure and hypertension interchangeably. They mean the exact same thing. So if your systolic blood pressure gets in the 130s or your diastolic blood pressure gets in the 80s, you have hypertension. If it gets up above 140 or over 90, that's what we used to call hypertension. That's called stage 2 hypertension. And it gets particularly dangerous if your top number gets over 180 or your bottom number gets over 120. So here's a question that many of us should ask ourselves is, do I really have high blood pressure? And sometimes it's not that clear that you have high blood pressure or not. So I encourage everyone to get a blood pressure machine. A good machine like this one is around the arm and automated. And so I consider that to be the first skill, is get a machine and learn how to check your blood pressure every day. A lot of you have that skill. That's great. This is from the American Medical Association. This is the technique for proper checking of your blood pressure. And the key 7 features that they recommend are you should use a blood pressure cuff of the right size. So a typical cuff might not fit your arm if you have a larger arm. You should check your blood pressure on a bare arm, and the arm should be supported at around heart level on some kind of surface like that table. Your legs should be uncrossed and your feet should be on the ground. And I don't recommend having a conversation or talking while you're checking your blood pressure. If you do all those things just right, you should get an accurate reading. And so that's a second skill, is how to read your blood pressure properly. But that said, it's still not always completely clear if you have high blood pressure. Some people's blood pressure goes up and down frequently, or it's very high in the office and low at home, or vice versa. So this 24-hour blood pressure monitor can be a very useful tool to elucidate whether you really have high blood pressure. And it can also tell us stuff like, do I have white coat hypertension, where it's high in the doctor's office, or do I have so-called masked hypertension, where it's actually normal in the doctor's office but higher at home? And that actually carries some extra risk. Or also it can tell you if we have reverse hypertension, which is where your blood pressure gets higher at night. And that's another condition that carries extra risk. So it can be particularly useful to learn this information. So knowing about a blood pressure, ambulatory blood pressure monitor, and how to get it set up is a third key skill. I think this is underutilized. And just so you know, how can you get it set up? Through our office. You could even just call and ask us to set it up, and I will certainly approve it. Why do I have high blood pressure? So that's a good question. A little soul searching might reveal that about 90% of cases are what we call primary hypertension or essential hypertension. And that basically means the answer is because your genes plus your environment. There's no specific genetic alteration we can identify. There's no specific problem in your hormone levels. It really comes down to just how your body reacts to the lifestyle that we lead. And I pictured some Western foods and Western body habitus, and that's because hypertension is a disease of Westernization. When you look at cultures where they haven't Westernized and they don't eat foods like this, you really don't see hypertension nearly as frequently. Now, the other 10% of cases are thought to be so-called secondary hypertension. And that's where we have a real identifiable cause. It's typically either in the endocrine system, like the parathyroid glands can pump out too much parathyroid hormone, or the adrenal glands can pump out too much cortisol or adrenaline. Also, some kidney problems can cause hypertension, such as narrowing of the arteries to the kidneys and also chronic kidney disease. And some narrowing of the aorta on a congenital basis can also cause secondary hypertension. So when do we think about secondary hypertension? We think about it when your blood pressure is surprisingly high, when your age is less than 30, when you get a high blood pressure at an unexpectedly young age, when you have elevated creatinine level, meaning chronic kidney disease, or if you have low potassium, and this is a classic pattern of low potassium plus high blood pressure equals hyperaldosteronism, which is one of the more common causes of secondary hypertension. There's also some drugs that raise blood pressure. Many of you are aware. The NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, naproxen, Aleve. The oral contraceptive pills can do it, and certain supplements like mahuang and ephedra can do it. Excessive alcohol intake is known to elevate blood pressure, and excessive intake is defined as more than 2 drinks a day for men or more than 1 drink a day for women. But I do think that any amount of alcohol raises blood pressure to some extent. So this is a skill, I would say, is the skill of not drinking to excess, which I think carries many health benefits if you can avoid excessive alcohol intake. Why should I care if I have high blood pressure? Does it really matter? Well, according to one of the largest surveys ever done, this was done by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's called the Global Burden of Disease Survey. They found that high blood pressure is one of the top causes of death and disability worldwide, even higher than blood glucose, according to this particular study. And in particular, high blood pressure causes problems in 3 organs, mainly. The heart, where it can cause a heart attack, which can be fatal. It can also cause congestive heart failure, which is where, because of fighting against the back pressure year after year, the heart muscle thickens, and that can cause major problems with how well the heart makes blood flow through it. The second organ would be the brain, where you can get a stroke, which also can be fatal. And finally, you can get chronic kidney disease, and this develops typically slowly over many years. All of these conditions develop without warning, and so as a consequence, we tend to call hypertension the silent killer. So how can I stop high blood pressure? I'm going to show you a video from nutritionfacts.org, which I know many of you are familiar with. This is a 5-minute video.
High blood pressure is the #1 risk factor for death in the world, affecting nearly 78 million Americans. That's 1 in 3 adults. And as we age, our pressures get higher and higher, such that by age 60, it strikes more than half. Well, if it affects most of us when we get older, maybe it's less a disease and more just an inevitable consequence of aging. No, we've known since the 1920s that high blood pressure need not occur. Researchers measured the blood pressure of 1,000 people in rural Kenya who ate a diet centered around whole plant foods, whole grains, beans, vegetables, fruit, and dark green leafies. Our pressures go up as we age. Their pressures actually go down. And the lower, the better. The whole 140/90 cutoff is arbitrary. Even people who start out with blood pressures under 120/80 appear to benefit from blood pressure reduction. If you went to your doctor with a blood pressure 120/80, you'd get a gold star, but the ideal blood pressure, the no benefit from reducing it further blood pressure, may actually be 110/70. 110/70. Is it even possible to get blood pressures down that low? It's not just possible, it's normal for those eating healthy enough diets. For 2 years at a rural Kenyan hospital, 1,800 patients were admitted. How many cases of high blood pressure did they find? 0. Wow, they must have had low rates of heart disease. No, they had no rates of heart disease. Not a single case of arteriosclerosis, our number one killer, was found. Rural China, too, about 110 over 70 their entire lives, 70-year-olds with the same average blood pressure as 16-year-olds. Now, Africa, China, vastly different diets, but what they shared in common is that they were plant-based day to day with meat only eaten on special occasions. Now, why do we think it's the plant-based nature of their diets that was so protective? Because in the Western world, as the American Heart Association has pointed out, the only folks really getting it down that low were those eating strictly plant-based diets, coming in at about 110 over 65. This is the largest study of those eating plant-based diets to date, 89,000 Californians, comparing non-vegetarians to so-called semi-vegetarians or flexitarians, eating meat more on a weekly basis than a daily basis, compared to those who eat no meat except fish, compared to those who eat no meat at all, compared to those who eat no meat, eggs, or dairy. Now, this was an Adventist study, so even the non-vegetarians didn't eat a lot of meat, and they tended to eat lots of fruits and vegetables and exercised and, not smoke. And so even compared to a group of relatively healthy meat eaters, there appeared to be a stepwise drop in hypertension rates as people ate more and more plant-based. Same thing with diabetes and obesity. So yes, we can wipe out most of our risk eating strictly plant-based, but it's not all or nothing. It's not black or white. Any movement along this spectrum towards eating healthier can accrue significant health benefits. You can show this experimentally. You take vegetarians, you give them meat, pay them enough to eat it, and their blood pressures go up. Or you remove meat from people's diets and blood pressures go down in just 7 days. And this is after the vast majority reduced or stopped their blood pressure medications completely. They had to stop their medications. Once you treat the cause, once you eliminate the disease, you can't be on blood pressure pills with normal blood pressure. You can drop your pressures too low, get dizzy, fall over, hurt yourself. So your doctor has to pull you off the pills. Lower pressures on fewer drugs. That's the power of plants. So, does the American Heart Association recommend a no meat diet? No, they recommend a low meat diet, the so-called DASH diet. Why not completely plant-based? When the DASH diet was being created, were they just not aware of this landmark research done by Harvard's Frank Sachs? No, they were aware. The chair of the design committee that came up with the DASH diet was Frank Sachs. See, the DASH diet was explicitly designed with the number one goal of capturing the blood pressure lowering benefits of a vegetarian diet, yet contain enough animal products to make it palatable to the general population. They didn't think the public could handle the truth. Now, in their defense, you can see what they were thinking. I mean, just like drugs never work unless you actually take them, diets never work unless you actually eat them. So they're like, look, no one's going to eat strictly plant-based. So if they soft pedaled the message and came up with some kind of compromise diet, then maybe on a population scale, they'd do more good. Okay, tell that to the 1,000 American families a day that lose a loved one to high blood pressure. Maybe it's time to start telling the American public the truth.
All right. So that was Dr. Michael Greger and from his website, nutritionfacts.org. And I consider this website to be quite a gem and a important skill for good health and reversing your blood pressure. This is a nonprofit website, and it's all evidence-based. As you can see, he shows scientific study after scientific study. So it's just a great window into this world, this huge world of nutrition and lifestyle research. To sign up for his daily alerts, you go to his website and click subscribe and email subscriptions, and you will get every day a new email from nutritionfacts.org. So I recommend that. So this is a joint statement from the American Heart Association, the American College of Cardiology, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. An effective approach to high blood pressure control. And they recommend this algorithm. I'm not going to go through the algorithm, but suffice it to say that they all recommend that lifestyle modification is step one. So when I say I'm a lifestyle medicine doctor and we try to get people to change their lifestyle, this is not exotic stuff. This is not fringe medicine. This is step one, core, the most important thing you can be doing medicine. The mistake that traditional medicine makes is we just skip right over this step. And in lifestyle medicine, we put it front and center and we say, by golly, we can change your lifestyle, and by golly, we can get real results. So this is that diet that is recommended by all three of those bodies. It's called the DASH diet. And this particular diet, as you can see, is a particularly pretty healthy diet compared to the standard American diet. What you see is you have a lot of, and by the way, I'll ask everybody to mute your phone perhaps. Thanks so much. You can see there's a lot of fruits and vegetables. There's a little bit of legumes in there, but I would fault this diet for having a bit of animal products, particularly some fatty dairy products here, some desserts and butters, and then a lot of eggs and meat. So, but recall, as Dr. Greger showed us, that this diet being a bit of a pescatarian diet, yes, this diet lowers blood pressure a solid 38 percentage points, which is amazing. But perhaps we can do better, because if we were to drive that animal product consumption down to zero, you get a further huge reduction in your risk of blood pressure over time. So that's why in lifestyle medicine, we don't like to soft pedal the message. We don't like to boil it down and some might say paternalistically hide you from the truth, but rather say the truth is this is the ideal. And you can choose, if you like, to follow it as much as you choose. So rather than the DASH diet, we recommend the whole food plant-based diet as that ideal, that quote unquote ideal. Now, is this ideal for 100% of everybody in the world? Maybe not. Maybe some of us, as we get older and we're losing weight, it is finally important to emphasize protein in the diet. But for most of our lives, this is the diet that reverses disease and maintains good health. And so what are the 5 main food groups in this diet? Well, we have legumes, beans, lentils, and peas. We have whole grains such as quinoa, brown rice, corn. We have fruits and vegetables, and finally nuts and seeds. And the one that we recommend limiting is nuts and seeds because they are very calorie dense, very oily. And that is the whole food plant-based diet. And to know those 5 food groups of the whole food plant-based diet, I consider to be an important disease reversing skill. Special mention to leafy greens, dark greens such as spinach, arugula, several times per day. These are rich in so-called plant nitrates. And plant nitrates are known vasodilators. They're also particularly healthy for endothelial function. The springiness of your arteries is improved by eating dark green leafy vegetables. So you can have these things at breakfast, at lunch, at dinner. And I want to emphasize that at lunch, this is my sine qua non, the enormous salad, a half gallon of salad every day for lunch with beans and broccoli sprouts and red onions and what have you, chopped up and placed in that salad with a low-fat dressing. And it will keep you moving. What about drugs? This is the usual answer. You go to see a doctor about blood pressure and he's going to talk to, or she's going to talk to you about drugs. Let's look at how effective are drugs. How beneficial are drugs for a typical range of high blood pressure? This is probably the range that most of you are in, maybe 140 to 160, top number, 159 rather, over diastolic in the 90s. And the control group is people without treatment, and the slashed line group is the group with treatment. And as you can see, the drugs reduce the risk of fatal heart attack, of all heart attacks, of strokes, fatal strokes, and of all strokes to some extent, but it doesn't reduce it to zero. We get a relatively modest reduction by using blood pressure drugs to reduce these deadly diseases. We're not even coming close to 50% reduction. And that's largely why I'm not so enthusiastic about drugs, and I prefer to get people off drugs because they're not as effective as people would think. So you treat 100 people for 5 years, you prevent 2 heart attacks or strokes, and you save 0.8 lives. according to this meta-analysis done in 1993. Well, let's look at another meta-analysis on the same question, and this is done by the respected Cochrane collaboration, a academic group of scientific researchers, and they did a meta-analysis a little more recently, and they found that there was no reduction in mortality or in heart attacks or strokes. So to summarize their findings, you treat 100 people for 5 years, you get 0 heart attacks or strokes prevented, you don't save any lives, and you get 9 serious side effects. So I consider this to be another skill, the skill of knowing when to be skeptical about the value of traditional medical interventions. Again, for blood pressure, for moderately elevated blood pressure. But make no mistake, it is much healthier to have lower blood pressure. And in fact, research shows that for every 1 point lowering of your blood pressure, you reduce your risk of a heart attack, of death by heart attack, by 2%. You reduce your risk of death by stroke by 3% for every 1 point reduction in your blood pressure. So it really does make a difference. It's just best to have that low blood pressure in the first place and not necessarily to use a pill to get that lower blood pressure. A word about valsartan. Valsartan was recalled, at least valsartan as manufactured by these 5 manufacturers was recalled just weeks ago in July 2018. So those of you who are on valsartan are recommended to switch to another drug. So which drug? Well, if you were never on an ACE inhibitor, it might be time to try lisinopril, which is a generic and very well tolerated ACE inhibitor. But if you developed a cough on an ACE inhibitor, then you want to stick with an angiotensin receptor blocker like losartan or irbesartan, and there are others. This is a key slide. If you're going to remember one slide, remember this slide. When I thought about doing this webinar, this is some of the main information I wanted to make sure to get out there. If you are taking a blood pressure drug, make sure that at least one of them is at bedtime. I don't know why we don't distribute this information more widely in medicine, because look at the benefits you get of just switching the timing of your blood pressure drug to bedtime. Number one, you get better control of your blood pressure overall, especially at nighttime, which appears to be particularly important in preventing heart attack and stroke. But you get these fringe benefits, these side benefits, by just switching the timing of your blood pressure drug. A 59% reduction in the risk of diabetes, a 2/3 reduction in the risk of heart attack, and a 73% reduction in the risk of chronic kidney disease. So this is a major skill. Know that you need to take at least one of your blood pressure drugs at bedtime. And keep in mind, not all blood pressure drugs are created equal. I might be going out on a limb a little bit here, but I think ACE inhibitors such as lisinopril or angiotensin receptor blockers such as losartan or valsartan are possibly the best choice. And mainly I say that because they are associated with reduction in diabetes. I'm going to argue that hydrochlorothiazide, which by the way is the #1 most commonly prescribed blood pressure drug in this country, we shouldn't use it. That's my argument. And there's considerable research suggesting this. It has a high rate of side effects, it has low efficacy, and it even increases diabetes. And until recently, I've been prescribing this myself. And actually it was in the course of researching for this webinar that I came across just the bounty of literature opposed to the use of hydrochlorothiazide. So I do think it's a good choice, rather than hydrochlorothiazide, to use perhaps chlorthalidone, another diuretic in the same class that does not have these drawbacks. So the top 3 recommended classes of blood pressure drugs are ACE inhibitors or ARBs, like lisinopril, like losartan or valsartan, calcium channel blockers like amlodipine, and a diuretic like chlorthalidone. So that's skill number 10. Know the top 3 class of blood pressure drugs. How can I cure hypertension without drugs? Well, we already visited one way, the whole food plant-based diet, or moving along in that spectrum toward more and more plant food. As I say, more and more fiber in the diet, because this is where the fiber is. It's not anywhere else. It's only in these 5 foods. It's not in animal products. And I'll just put a plug in for the 21-day vegan kickstart. It's got that ugly word vegan in it, but I'll tell you what, this website's been in operation for over 10 years. They've got a lot of recipes in there, and for those plant-based meals that you're going to make, this is a good source. Dr. Barnard has books in support of the 21-day kickstart. It's just a very good website. And there's a skill right there. Sodium. Everybody knows that sodium raises blood pressure. The average American eats about 3,400 milligrams a day. The recommended daily allowance of sodium is 2,300 milligrams a day. That's probably a very high sodium diet, actually. And if you're able to lower your sodium intake by 2,300 milligrams a day, research suggests that you would lower your blood pressure by about 3 to 6 millimeters of mercury, 3 to 6 points in the top blood pressure, the systolic. That doesn't seem like that much, but make no mistake, excess sodium is a leading killer. Again, according to this global burden of disease survey, diet high in sodium accounts for a 2 years loss of life globally on average, which is massive. So it does seem quite prudent to eat a diet low in sodium. Now, where is the sodium in our diet? Well, most of it's in processed foods, and the number one source in the American diet is bread. And after that comes pizza and other bread-containing things, sandwiches. And it's not just bread, it's certainly the cured meats and cold cuts. Soups, particularly canned soups, canned products in general, very salty, on down the list to cheese and chicken and eggs and omelets. So there's a skill. Know where the salt is. If it touches your palate and it doesn't taste like cardboard, it's probably very salty. How's that one? So how much is too much? Reading labels is key. Here's a trick. For every 1 calorie you eat, you should eat no more than 1 milligram of sodium. And the idea is most of us eat somewhere around 2,000 calories a day. And the recommendation is don't eat more than about 2,000 milligrams of sodium. So as long as those two numbers are matched, you're all right. So for example, look at this can of beans. It has 100 calories, but it has 400 milligrams of sodium. That's a high sodium food. If it were a normal sodium food, it would have only 100 milligrams of sodium. So to get that sodium off those beans is you got to drain them and rinse them. And after you've done that, put it in your fridge and keep it there and use it every time you're about to eat something. Pour some beans on it. That's a very healthy way of getting your beans. Rich in potassium and calcium and magnesium, and all those things lower your blood pressure. Here's a loaf of bread. It has 120 calories, has 220 milligrams of sodium, so it's very salty. What about exercise? Everybody knows exercise is healthy. Moderate intensity exercise lowers blood pressure about 5 points, maybe a little more. Interval training is a particularly beneficial way and efficient way of getting your exercise. A personal trainer, I highly recommend people get a personal trainer. I've recommended this for years and I have yet to get many people to do it, but these people can be very valuable. And I'll put it to you this way. If you have enough money for cable TV, you have enough money for a personal trainer. Learn to love some form of year-round exercise. If you're going to wait for the pleasant evenings to walk, then you're not walking most of the year in Delaware. And there are many benefits beyond blood pressure, obviously, for exercise, cognitive health, emotional health, longevity, and many others. So learning all these different skills for exercise are very important. So I encourage you, I consider these to be crucial to leading your optimal life. This is from another Greger video from our good friend, Dr. Michael Greger from nutritionfacts.org, where he showed that the average American's blood pressure is about 132. He said, look at these long distance runners, these people who ran an average of 48 miles for 20 years. They lowered their blood pressure not 5 points, but 10 points. So that you can get a significant lowering of blood pressure by running even more than just moderate intensity exercise. But look at this number 104. Guess who that is? That's couch potato vegans. So you can sit on the couch and eat plant food and have your blood pressure 28 points lower than the average American. So just saying, exercise helps, but if you put these into perspective, plants help more. I'm not going to show this interesting video from Dr. Michael Greger, but this is the video where he mentioned that science. And that brings us to superfoods, because this is another thing he mentioned in that video, hibiscus tea. Well, I guess I'll mention it because there's some very interesting randomized controlled trials with hibiscus tea suggesting that it might lower our blood pressure as much as 7 points or as much as this ACE inhibitor called captopril at its starting dose. Now, you have to drink a fair bit of hibiscus tea, about 5 cups or about 10 grams of the hibiscus steeped in hot water to get that kind of dose. But we'll call that an important blood pressure lowering skill. And if someone can drink that much hibiscus tea every day for decades, then you too can have a normal blood pressure, hopefully. Now, flax seeds merit special attention. These are a very potent superfood that has lots of benefits. And in this particular study, people were randomized to either eat 30 grams of flax seeds or placebo for 6 months. They actually gave out food to everybody, and it either had the flax in it or it had a placebo grain. And then they measured blood pressure. And what they found is that blood pressure dropped about 10 points over 7 in the flax group. For people who had high blood pressure to begin with, it dropped 15 over 7. This is a very significant amount of drop. So what we're talking about is ground flax seeds, because that's how you really need them ground up to absorb them. And when we're talking about 30 grams, that's about a quarter cup, actually a little more. So that's a lot of flaxseed. So far I have yet to see someone report to me that the flaxseed is lowering their blood pressure, partially because maybe it takes a while and partially because who's eating a quarter cup of the stuff every day. It kind of disappears in oatmeal. It disappears in a smoothie. It doesn't disappear in that much else that I've found. But this is a skill, eating flax every day. And there's evidence that it might prevent breast cancer. It might prevent prostate cancer. So I consider flaxseed to be a superfood we should all eat. And this is some very interesting research on coenzyme Q10. I always thought coenzyme Q10 must be some nutty concoction because it's got such a fancy exotic name. Well, guess what? It's actually a fairly ubiquitous chemical in the human body. We make it ourselves, but as we get older, we don't make enough of it. And there's some excellent science on supplementing coenzyme Q10. So this meta-analysis, for example, found that supplementing with coenzyme Q10 across multiple studies seemed to reduce blood pressure by about 8 points systolic or about 13 points systolic. This particular study looked at people with congestive heart failure and found some very surprising benefits. Reduction in cardiac mortality is basically what we see in this graph. You'll have to take my word for it. And the other interesting thing is, what about side effects from coenzyme Q10? Coenzyme Q10 is one of the few supplements or interventions or drugs I've ever seen where the side effects, the intervention group, the coenzyme Q10 group, had fewer side effects than the control. So you actually had less side effects taking coenzyme Q10 than taking a sugar pill. Now that's my kind of supplement. But what they also found in this study is that coenzyme Q10 in people with congestive heart failure actually boosted the heart's function. It could pump better when they took CoQ10. I think they were taking 200 or 300 milligrams in that study. And finally, a third study. This is a study done in the Netherlands where people were randomized for 10 years to take either CoQ10, 300 milligrams a day, or plus selenium, 300 micrograms a day, or placebo. And what they found is that people take, 200 milligrams a day, and selenium 200 micrograms a day. And what they found is that the death rate was cut in half. The overall mortality rate and the cardiovascular mortality rate was cut in half in this 10-year period. So I think CoQ10 is probably an important health skill, and I recommend probably most people on this call should think about taking CoQ10, especially if you're over age 70. So do any behaviors lower blood pressure? Well, there's this neat device called Respirate, and as they say, the manufacturer claims it is the only non-drug therapy cleared by the FDA for the treatment of high blood pressure and the reduction of stress. So this is a tool that gives you biofeedback and coaches you to breathe slowly. And there's actual research to show that this thing can lower blood pressure by 14/8 points in about 8 weeks. So you're supposed to use it about 15 minutes a day, 3 to 4 times a week, and it costs $200. So you can go on respirate.com and order one of these today and start lowering your blood pressure and maybe getting some stress reduction in the process. So there's an important skill. Learn how to breathe. I'll tell you that there's some evidence that meditation works too. I don't have time to get into the research there, but I recommend everybody meditate, mindfulness, perhaps respirate. This is an interesting book called Healing Hypertension, in which the author, who is an expert specialist hypertension doctor, argues that in his experience, many of the people who had very difficult to control blood pressure, the root cause of their hypertension was hidden emotions. And the kind of hidden emotions he's talking about is childhood trauma, unresolved emotions, or traumatic life events that we never grieved. Picture something that you should have cried about, but you never did. You were too busy, you couldn't do it, you had to move on, and so you kind of push those emotions down under the surface. And he gives case study after case study of people who had this happen to them, and when he finally uncovered it and sent them for psychotherapy, the problems resolved, the blood pressure came right down. So think about this. If maybe there's something in your past that might be bothering you in this way, and think about making an appointment with a psychotherapist to investigate it. I'm happy to talk about it with you too. So there's a key skill for lowering blood pressure. Skill number 21. What about fasting? Not what you eat, but when you eat. Well, this is also about what you eat. This fasting mimicking diet pictured here is something I actually tried last week. And what it is about 800 to 1100 calories a day for 5 days. And the idea is we're going to induce a moderate form of ketosis, but moderate enough that you don't lose muscle mass and you lose some weight, and you can speed along certain forms of cellular repair and apoptosis and stimulate the stem cells and all this fancy sounding mumbo jumbo, but does it work? Well, there's a fair bit of science indicating that it might be beneficial. This packaged 5-day solution, typically they report 6-point reduction in blood pressure in 5 days with lasting benefits. And if anybody's interested in something like this, we can get it for you for $200. This is not something we're making money on, but this was popularized in a recent book called The Longevity Diet, and we have had some people asking about it. And because the science is so good, that's why I felt compelled to try it out. And it did work for me. I lost quite a bit of weight in the first 5 days and a lot of body fat. I think that's the most compelling thing for me, is getting rid of that visceral fat proved to be very difficult. So I see this as potentially a tool you can use to get over, kickstart yourself, get over a hump perhaps. The authors recommend that you do this once a month or once every 6 months or somewhere in between, depending on how much of a dose of this intermittent fasting you want to get. So perhaps this is an important skill if it's the kind of thing for you. By the way, this is not something we recommend for anyone over age 70. There's another form. There's multiple other forms of fasting. I'll mention this one, which was just published recently, in which the study subjects were asked to eat for only an 8-hour period. So they ate from about 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day for 6 weeks. And what did they get for all that effort? They lost 7 points. Sorry, 12 weeks. They lost 7 points on their systolic blood pressure. So, but before you rush out and do this, I'll mention that look at all these things that didn't improve: fat mass, lean mass, visceral fat mass, diastolic blood pressure, LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, fasting glucose, fasting insulin, there's insulin sensitivity, and homocysteine. None of those things got better in 12 weeks. So I'm not sure if it's worth it, but you could think about intermittent fasting. I do recommend it. I think it's healthy to try to stop eating by about 8 p.m. at night and try not to eat for 12 hours. So there it is, 25 secrets to lower blood pressure. Now, I'm not going to read these right now in the interest of time. We will post them on our website, progressivehealthproject.com. And here's a little sample checklist if you were taking a whole lot of notes of some things that you could do. And we will post this on progressivehealthproject.com. But I wanted to go through a couple case studies. Jessica has had high blood pressure since 2013. She was kind enough to share her story. We're so grateful. And it's a powerful one. Her upper number was consistently in the 130s with medication, and it's in the 140s without medication. Why does Jessica have this high blood pressure? Combination of probably a combination of her genetics and lifestyle. So the turning point for her was she watched Forks Over Knives, and she knows the date, June 16th, 2018, just weeks ago. And so she eliminated all meat, dairy, eggs, and oil from the diet on the spot. Okay, so this movie can be pretty influential. And her blood pressure had come down to 120/82 without medication. She'd lost 6 pounds. That's pretty impressive. So I'll just mention that movie, Forks Over Knives. And, you know, she's not the only one who was influenced by that. Many people were. A lot of people report this was the turning point when they watched this movie. And you know, I don't know anyone who reports that it was a negative experience watching the movie. So it came out in 2011. It's free on Netflix and at the library. And it's actually sufficiently factual that the American Medical Association has approved Forks Over Knives for continuing medical education. So doctors can watch that movie and get CME credit. And I wish they all would. There's been lots of documentaries like What the Health, Eating You Alive, and The Game Changers. Meet Suzanne. She was kind enough to share her story. She participated in our Cure Diabetes program in January of 2018. She had her weight had stabilized after a gastric bypass. And for blood pressure, she was on 3 drugs in January. But after our program, come March, she had cut them in about half. And her weight had come down significantly, and as had her blood pressure, down from about 152, 132, down to about 110 on less medication. And then we have Doris. Doris is an 83-year-old woman. She has high blood pressure. She was on 3 blood pressure drugs and chronic kidney disease. And she met with Drs. Eric and Karen Smith in July when her blood pressure was 130, 140. But after 2 weeks on a plant-based diet, look at these numbers. She can't get into the 130. She's 118, 125, 124, 113, 106, 116. So Dr. Zarek was forced to withdraw the hydrochlorothiazide. Good choice, Dr. Zarek. And hopefully Doris's can continue sliding downward. So we'll show you a video, a quick 3-minute video from Karen Smith on preparing some healthy meals. And then hopefully we'll have time to take some questions. So there you have it. That is our presentation. So I'd be happy to take some questions now. I'm looking over the questions. Chong asked, I heard about potassium containing salt. Is it effective? Where can you get it? So this, you're talking about salt substitute, I believe. And you can get salt in the salt shaker that instead of sodium has potassium. I have not seen a clinical trial with potassium containing salts. We tend to be a little suspicious of it because it's a supplement, and for people with aha, can you hear me? Aha. Okay, now you can hear me.
We can see you too.
All right, I'm not sure at what point you couldn't hear me. Did I answer Chong's question about potassium containing salt? Basically, I'm not aware of whether salt substitutes like potassium containing salt is healthy. Is it effective for lowering blood pressure? No doubt, potassium lowers blood pressure, but I recommend you get the potassium from the foods, and that's, where is it? It's in beans, it's in greens, it's in vegetables and fruits, particularly. Magnesium is there too. Fiber, all these things are wonderful for your health, and they do lower your blood pressure. Next question was, what about a coenzyme Q supplement per day? I recommend no more than about 100 to 400 milligrams in a day. EK, do you have a handout with the salient points covered in this presentation? We will post it on our website, which is progressivehealthproject.com. And the next diabetes meeting is going to be starting August 13th. That's going to be Mondays, 6 to 7:30 p.m. And it's going to be held at the First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, which is just a quarter mile from our practice. Other questions? Thank you, Arlene. I want to hear questions. Does anyone have any other thoughts, questions, ideas? Does anyone want to volunteer to speak up and tell us a little bit about where you are or what you have experienced? Margaret, thank you for sharing. Have been taking CoQ10 at 120 milligrams. Is 200 milligrams better? The research from the Netherlands showing a 50% reduction in cardiovascular mortality, they were taking 200. Actually, they were taking, I believe, 100 twice a day. They were also taking 200 micrograms of selenium. I'm not sure why they took both of those two drugs. Selenium is concentrated in Brazil nuts. You take one a week. Eat one Brazil nut a week to get a good dose of selenium. Can I take CoQ10 while taking losartan? Yes. I don't see why not, Stanley. Great question. I want to hear somebody else with something to share. Testimonials. EK, please email Dr. Donohue your identity. Thank you. Thank you. Arlene, I've been plant-based, but blood pressure still 144 over 84. What am I doing wrong? Excellent question, Arlene. You know, results may vary. I don't want to say that everybody's blood pressure is going to drop in 7 days when they start eating plant-based. So we're all very different, and some of it has to do with it can take a longer time. Some of it has to do with, oh, I don't know, losing that that belly fat. That belly fat seems to want to stay with us, and it seems to want to prevent some of our numbers from improving, and it can be hard to burn down. That would be my best answer, Arlene. But maybe in the course of this presentation, there were a couple other tricks that might get you over the hump, such as coenzyme Q10 or flax or, oh, I don't know, hibiscus tea, or maybe intermittent fasting, or eating for trying to stop eating at 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. Yoga, says Margaret, improves your breathing and also is good exercise. It's a win-win. I love win-wins, Margaret. Excellent point. Thank you for sharing that. Yoga is also good for preventing long-term low back pain. Yoga is wonderful stuff. Arlene, I have been off the HCTZ. Arlene, I believe you might have run into problems with HCTZ in the past, if I'm not mistaken. And Barney, what is the typical cycle of blood pressure over a day? It tends to be higher in the daytime and lower at night. That's the main trend. When that's not the case, when it's higher at night and lower in the daytime, that's called, some people call that reverse hypertension. And that, I've read, correlates with a 3 times risk of heart disease. We don't understand why it happens or why it confers higher risk. And that's the kind of thing we can find out with ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, a 24-hour blood pressure monitor. Belly fat might be the issue. Elliot, thank you for divulging your secret identity. Do blood thinners like Xarelto change any of what is recommended in the presentation? Great question. I believe the answer to that is no. I'm not aware of any issues you run into with Xarelto. There's not a interaction with vitamin K or dark green leafy vegetables. So I believe you're safe there's not a significant interaction between the drugs, typical blood pressure drugs and Xarelto, nor with typical foods and Xarelto. Chaw, blood pressure monitoring fluctuates when I measure 3 times. What is the best blood pressure measurement device? Well, they do have these machines that measure 3 times, boom, 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 in succession and give you the average. And as far as I know, that's as good as it gets. Stanley, what is the best way to take flaxseed? However you can get it down your gullet, Stanley. Great question. It's not unpleasant. It's a little bit nutty, but it's a little bit grainy. So you're gonna notice it unless you're eating something grainy, like you can mix it into your grains that you're eating your, oh, I don't know, your curry, your lentil curry over, or mix it into your grains that you're eating your veggie chili over, or mix it into your oatmeal, or mix it into your smoothie. Jessica, how hard was the intermittent fast for you, Dr. Donohue? Thank you for asking, Jessica. I described it as 5 days of pain and social isolation. I did not enjoy it. I was the only one doing it in my family. I think if someone else were doing it with you in the family, then you might have an easier time. Also, there was a lot of hunger. I can't speak to whether I speeded along cellular apoptosis or turnover of damaged cells, but I can speak that I did drop belly fat, and we'll see how long that lasts. Arlene, did chia help with blood pressure? I don't know, Arlene. I'll have to take that offline, and I did not see chia come up as a solution for blood pressure, but chia is such a wonderful source of omega-3, and I will tell you that DHA and EPA omega-3 do lower blood pressure. I did not include that in the talk, and maybe I should have, but chia is a good source of omega-3 as well, and also fiber, very healthy stuff. You can make a wonderful chia pudding, for example. Keep the questions coming. I love the questions. I love your ideas. Would anyone like to speak up? We could unmute you and you could speak. I will remind you that we will be sending out a survey after this, so please look for that. I'd be so grateful if you could fill out the survey afterwards. My goal with this thing is to make it better and better each time. This is version 1. I'm going to keep this slide deck and update it and fix errors. And as the science changes, we're going to put that in. As you have good ideas, I will include that as well. Margaret, always with the good questions. Margaret says, recent medical findings indicate evidence that managing high blood pressure could have a protective effect on the aging brain, such as Alzheimer's. I love it, Margaret. I completely believe it. There is really nothing good about high blood pressure, that is for sure. Other questions, thoughts, or ideas? Please keep them coming. Chong, is pre-hypertension for a long time bad? It's kind of an area under the curve thing, Chong. If you have pre-hypertension for a really long time, you're going to incur a slightly higher risk. It's not like it's the end of the world if your blood pressure is getting up into the 120s. It just means you have a bit of a higher risk of heart attack or stroke. And just to be clear, what does high blood pressure do? Does it cause cancer? Probably not at all. It's pretty much only a problem with cardiovascular disease. And Elliot asks, should eggs be eliminated? Great question, Elliot. And I'm going to say, not necessarily, but the less you eat, the better. How's that for dodging the question? Eggs have been given this bit of a halo effect, where a lot of people believe that eggs are healthy. I thought eggs are healthy again. I hear this a lot. And the research has never changed on this. Eggs are not healthy again. And most of the research that you can parade out saying eggs are healthy show eggs, they'll compare an egg group to a control group that's particularly unhealthy, like an egg McMuffin group. And there literally has been research like this. And they show that eggs are healthier. Or another recent study out of Australia showing that eggs are healthy again, compared egg consumption to the control group. They said, all right, don't eat eggs, but eat an equal amount of protein, which meant eat an equal amount of chicken or beef, right? So, okay, eggs compared to the equal amount of chicken or beef, not much difference. It's when you switch from eggs to no eggs, that's when you get the real benefit. And we see a very significant increase in the rate of diabetes, of heart disease from just one egg a day. You can calculate the amount of thickening of the arteries in the carotids from the amount of tobacco you've been exposed to in your lifetime. Similarly, we can calculate the amount of thickening in your carotids from the amount of egg yolks you've been exposed to in your lifetime.
Can you hear me, David?
Yes.
It's Jim Crum. What kind of oil do you recommend, or no oil?
Great question, Jim. Thanks for asking that question. I recommend the best oil is probably either canola oil or olive oil, and maybe flax, but in small quantities. And oil is a processed food. Oil was not consumed by humans in large quantities until the Industrial Revolution. That's a very short period of time in our evolutionary history. So oil, you take olive oil, you take the olive and squeeze out the oil and throw out the fiber and throw out all that other healthy stuff that comes with the olive. So we recommend get your oils from the whole foods, so less processed. Oil is a very concentrated source of calories. If you're trying to lose that belly fat, if you're trying to slim down or reduce your risk of diabetes, less oil is very much part of the solution.
What about extra virgin?
Extra virgin would be the best form of olive oil, and use it for enjoyment. It's very flavorful. Saute if you enjoy, and if it's going to be the vehicle to get you to eat more plant food or more stir fries or more wonderful dishes, then by all means use it. But you can, as Karen showed in her video, you can saute with water. You don't have to do it. So if you're trying to get the biggest bang for your buck, in terms nutritionally, you might cook oil free. I was told that high blood pressure is like broken glass going through your veins. Is that true? I don't know about that. I don't know if that's an accurate characterization. High blood pressure does a little bit of wear and tear on the arteries and veins, and particularly the arteries. It adds a little bit of strain. It increases the tendency to form plaque, and it leads to endothelial dysfunction. This notion that and that's a fancy name. I apologize for that, but basically the blood vessels don't get as springy, and that is not a healthy thing. Farewell, Margaret. It was wonderful conversing with you virtually. Kenneth, is there any correlation with blood pressure and macular degeneration? Kenneth, I don't know the answer to that question. It's a great question, and I don't know it for sure. So I'll take that offline, and Lisa, maybe you can remind me to answer that question. Thank you. Chong, is stroke or heart attack the only risk for high blood pressure? The other main category is congestive heart failure and chronic kidney disease. And there's plenty of people on dialysis today just because they had a high blood pressure over the years. Didn't feel it, felt fine, but then they turn around and suddenly their kidneys are shot. And that can happen. That's one reason why we like to keep tabs on your creatinine level and do some of the blood work that we do. And Elliot, is there a book on the whole food diet that you recommend? And I recommend lots of them. What's a good one? Well, there's so many. Proteinaholic is one of my favorites. I like How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger. There's some that some of you might find more palatable. Thank you. Here's Dr. Michael Greger's cookbook, How Not to Die cookbook, which are not the simplest recipes, but I love everything Greger does. And there's so many others. Dr. Neil Barnard's book on the 21-day kickstart, or Dr. Joel Furman has some excellent books. One of my favorites is called The Starch Solution by Dr. McDougall, Dr. John McDougall. And this sounds nutty. Everything we've been taught says starch is not healthy. And when he says starch, he doesn't mean white flour. He means the natural starches, the potatoes. And he holds up the potato as a prime example of good health. And he says, look at all the cultures who survived on the potato and never got heart disease for many years in human history. And admittedly, these were peasants, and they weren't living that long. But he also holds up science showing that potatoes are rich in vitamins and rich in fiber. And the problem with the potato is arguably that we deep fry it, or that we serve it with butter, or that we eat it with sour cream. And he also holds up the whole grains and the beans as primary. Other authors hold up the dark green leafy vegetables and say this is what we should be gravitating to. But I think McDougall's onto something, because when you eat the starch, and my dinner tonight, for example, was 5 small sweet potatoes, and that's all I had, and I feel wonderfully full. So it is very filling, and it can be very nutritious. So it is a good way to promote satiety, to not have to overgraze, and to avoid the fatty containing foods. And again, the fat is where the calorie density is. And as a general principle for maintaining normal body weight and maintaining thinness throughout your life, we recommend the low calorie density approach. That means everything you're eating is relatively low in calorie density. So it's not the burgers, it's not the cheesesteaks, it's not the pizza. These are very calorie dense. It's not sandwiches and hoagies. Rather, it's whole potatoes, it's beans, it's whole grains, it's vegetables and fruits. Chong asks, any medicine or diet more effective in reducing the diastolic blood pressure? I don't know, Chong. Great question. Let me look into his diastolic blood pressure. Could you make a note of that, Lisa, too? Thank you so much. Elliot, thank you for your feedback. And I want to hear feedback. I want to hear how I can make it better. I really do. We're going to make this better every time. And I want to offer it to a larger and larger audience. So thank you, Elliot. And you were a major contributor with all your excellent questions. And we have 10 more minutes, don't we? Yeah. And I want to hear more questions. I would love to hear more questions, or anyone else who wants to get on and ask their question verbally. Please do so.
What about stress?
Stress stress raises blood pressure. Stress is the distress, the bad stress is not a healthy thing. So I'm a fan of, to combat that, I'm a fan of sleep and I recommend 8 hours a night. And I didn't share that research on blood pressure and sleep. It turns out in men, middle-aged men, sleeping less than 6 hours a night does raise your blood pressure. But 8 hours a night, we all need 8 hours a night for longevity, for preventing dementia. There really is no population of people, except a rare genetic variant, who doesn't need 8 hours of sleep, quality sleep. So I'll tell you, one group who's stressed out is people with sleep apnea. So if you snore most nights, you would be someone who probably is going to have a lot of stress and probably a high blood pressure. And we recommend you get diagnosed. I'm a fan of meditation and aerobic exercise. There's a lot of evidence that those things help prevent stress. Stress definitely raises blood pressure, as does stress you're not aware of, those hidden emotions. So think about that. B12. I recommend everybody take a B12 supplement across the board. B12 deficiency can hit anyone. It's relatively weakly supplied in our diet. Meat has some, but not that much. And vegetables and plants have even less. We mainly traditionally got B12 from eating dirt, and we don't eat dirt anymore. Yes, and with metformin, you especially need B12. Thank you, Elliot. Well stated. Excellent point. If you're on metformin, everybody take a B12. That should be slide number 1 next time. Lisa, make a note. I'm going to emphasize B12. Thank you, Elliot. That was a great upgrade to this presentation. Other upgrades, other thoughts, questions, ideas?
3 meals a day.
3 meals a day. In the longevity diet, Dr. Walter Longo recommends 2.5 or even 2 meals a day. So less meals, this frequent feeding. There's a lot of misinformation that gets out there. Eat frequent meals, avoid carbs, load up on the good fats, load up on coconut oil, so that we get this halo effect put over all these foods that don't warrant it. Coconut oil is not healthy. Coconut oil, you can do a research study and show that coconut oil reduces heart attacks when your control group is people eating butter, and that's what they do. But coconut oil does not reduce heart attacks, and this medium chain stuff is probably not all that it's cracked up to be. Your body makes the medium chains by eating the right kinds of fiber and resistant starches, and your microbiome makes the medium chain fatty acids. Any comments about melatonin? I'm a fan of melatonin. Excellent question, Kenneth. Melatonin probably lowers blood pressure. Is particularly good for sleep when you're changing time zones. It basically signals to your body when it's bedtime. Some people find melatonin very effective at helping them fall asleep. I generally recommend try not to take a pill to go to sleep. Try to learn how to do it safely. And there's a technique that medicine has found that really works for that, and it's called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI. And anyone who wants to get CBTI, there is a practitioner just a few miles from here who performs CBTI. So let me know, and I will set you up with cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. How much B12 to take a day? Supposedly we only need a ridiculously small amount, like 5 micrograms, or it's ridiculous. But I recommend, the sources I read say 100 micrograms a day or more. A typical supplement is 1,000 micrograms. You can't really overdose on vitamin B12, at least not that I'm aware of. I've never encountered that science. So at least 100 micrograms a day, or at least somewhere around there, would be good. Anthony, what about flaxseed oil supplement versus grinding the seeds? Well, the flaxseed oil is a processed food. Here again, you've taken the whole food, squeezed out the oil, threw away the wonderful lignans and fiber, and say goodbye, and all that you're left with is the oil. And yes, that oil is a rich source of omega-3, but I prefer you eat the flaxseed, and you're not going to get the benefit on preventing prostate cancer and breast cancer from the flaxseed oil. So I recommend eat the flax seeds. Makes sense to Anthony. If it's good enough for Anthony, it's good enough for me. Who else is out there? Who else? Other follow-up questions from
Raw.
What'd you say?
Should the flaxseed be raw?
Be raw. I've never seen, I guess, does somebody sell toasted flax seeds?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's best to be raw. In fact, nuts are best, healthiest when raw. Yeah, you get less advanced glycation end products and such. It's particularly healthy to eat raw nuts. What else? Love the questions. Love the thoughts. Did anyone get anything in terms of the blood pressure timing or blood pressure drugs? Anybody get a sense that, maybe I better make a change with my medications?
Yes. Take them at night.
At least,
Can I take both of them at night?
probably. What are they?
Losartan is one.
Yep.
I don't remember the name of the other.
Well, losartan's a 24-hour drug, so you can take that at night, definitely. Some of the research involves moving one of the blood pressure drugs to the night.
Or something like that.
What was that?
Diatelazine or something like that.
Diltiazem, right. That's a calcium channel blocker, and that's another good one. You're probably just fine taking them both at night. They're both 24-hour drugs. What else? So we have a couple more minutes. I want to hear those key last questions. We're going to send out a survey. I'll get it to you. I'll get you the link to the survey. Again, I'm grateful. I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas. How can we make this better? Should I do webinars like this on other topics? I've been using lisinopril HCTZ for 30 years. Should I get off HCTZ? You know, Kenneth, after the things I read, I would say maybe. Now, if you're really, really stable, fine. But I'll tell you what, here's a scenario that happens a lot. A man typically out, and it can happen to women too, but I've seen this happen in my practice to men multiple times. It's the summertime, you're outside, you're doing some work, and you pass out. And it's a couple things happen. You get a little dehydrated in the summer, your blood pressure drops a little bit in that setting. And typically you're taking a diuretic like HCTZ. So you can be stable on HCTZ for years and years, and then suddenly, especially as you make healthier lifestyle changes, you don't need as much, and suddenly you pass out. So to answer your question, I would say quite possibly yes. You could switch to regular. So what a trick a lot of drug companies do is they add HCTZ to it to extend the patent. Angelito, good presentation. I learned a lot. Thank you, Angelito. It is always a pleasure to be in your company, even in a virtual capacity. Arlene, this was great. Thanks. And yes, the webinars. I like the webinars on other subjects. This happened to me regarding Okay, so Arlene shares. This happened to me regarding hydrochlorothiazide. Yes, Arlene had a problem with hydrochlorothiazide and the setting of making some very healthy lifestyle changes, and it cost a lot of money. What food helps with atrial fib in order to get rid of the very expensive Xarelto? Well, it's not as easy as slam dunk to get rid of atrial fibrillation with food, but there is some science there, and apparently antioxidants and maybe avoiding fish can be helpful in preventing people from going in and out of atrial fibrillation. So we have some control over it. And Rose asks, great presentation. I'll be joining next time too. Keep them coming. Thank you, Rose. What a pleasure to have been in your company as well. Arlene, blood pressure dropped. Okay, so she's sharing some key details. Her blood pressure dropped on hydrochlorothiazide in the setting of losing a bunch of weight and making some very healthy lifestyle changes to 86/50, and she had 2 days in the hospital. And they threw just about every test known to man at the poor woman, and hopefully somebody else is paying the bills. And Chong asked, would you feel anything such as dizziness when having high blood pressure? Okay, great question. I have to add that is, what are the signs of high blood pressure? So what do you feel when you have high blood pressure? You can have chest pain, you can have headaches. Those would be two hypertensive emergencies. Other than that, it's quite variable. Some people feel a flushing in the head. We can't reliably say that people are going to get a particular feeling. Some people are aware of it. Other people are not aware of it when the blood pressure is sky high. CoQ10, is there one brand I recommend? No, but when you're talking about dietary supplements, you do always have to be careful, Rose, and that's a great question. I need to mention this, Lisa. You making notes?
Yes.
Is that dietary supplement industry is unregulated. So we have to be careful of our manufacturer. And often when you go and look at what's in the pill, it's not what they say. There's much less of the active ingredient, or there's other ingredients. So get a reputable brand. There is a website called consumerlabs.org, and these guys are an independent body who evaluate the products and actually measure what's in the pill, and you can get make a more informed decision. Arlene, what are the signs for low blood pressure other than dizzy and wanting to lay on the floor? What else do we get? Lightheaded. We get fatigued. Anybody else experience others? Ed Felton, great to hear from you. Thanks, Ed. Okay, and we're at the 8:01 time, so everybody's welcome to drop off, but I'm going to continue and answer questions. So Kenneth asks, any correlation blood pressure, intraocular pressure? Yes, there's very much a correlation. People have high blood pressure, people have glaucoma, are often the same person, but not always. So there's clearly some kind of genetic or other phenotypic variability there. Other thoughts and questions? Is lisinopril best taken at night? Sorry, I missed that one. Yes, in general, I would recommend. It goes down great at night. Okay, wait, here's some more. Stephen, I have been taking lisinopril and now hydrochlorothiazide in the morning. Results: high blood pressure in the morning, low blood pressure during the day, and by 9 p.m. it goes back up again. Stephen, let's talk. That's something we got to address. That's a consistent finding. I'd love to see your data if you could bring that in, or share it with me electronically, and I'm happy to weigh in on that one. But yeah, maybe my first step would be a switch from hydrochlorothiazide to chlorthalidone, and we could go from there. Barney, is lisinopril best taken at night? There it is. Probably, I would say yes. And Arlene, can the eye improve with a plant-based diet? There's actually an interesting video on nutritionfacts.org showing people with diabetic retinopathy. Sometimes it can improve. Not in the majority of cases, not in all cases, but not even in the majority, but in some cases, it has been found when people switch to a completely plant-based diet that diabetic retinopathy and even partial blindness has partially reversed. And that's powerful stuff, because we don't have medicines that do that. All right, Elliot, much appreciate your dedication. Thank you for coming, and take care. Lito, I take lisinopril and amlodipine and chlorthalidone at night before sleeping. Is that okay? I think so. The one consideration with taking a diuretic at night is it might make you get up to go to the bathroom at night. So for that reason, you might take your diuretic in the morning time. That's the chlorthalidone. Bessie, thanks for your feedback. Other thoughts, questions, ideas, comments? How do you like this platform, doing this on a webinar? Is this working out? Good night, Lito. Take care.
Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Jim. Thank you. All right, so long, everybody who's dropping off. Chinese meds of 4 stacks of celery helps instead of HCTZ. 4 stacks of celery lowers blood pressure. Guess why? Because it's rich in plant nitrates. So I said those dark green leafy vegetables. Well, celery is in the top 10 nitrate-containing vegetables, as are beets and rhubarb and spinach. And number 1 is arugula. And these foods are very rich in the nitrates. So you have a little handful of that every 6 to 8 hours through the day to improve endothelial function, improve blood flow, and improve blood pressure. So maybe that's why, Arlene. Jessica, was Karen cooking interview? That was Karen. She did some other videos, and we'll put them on our website and on YouTube. No, not YouTube. Well, maybe YouTube, on Facebook. I didn't have time to show them here. Great webinar. Thanks, Chong. Thanks. So long, everybody. Take care. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, great. Okay, good, good. I hope you find something useful. Next time I'll try to be a little more colorful. I know it was a little dry. It was Lisa's fault.
That's my fault.
Just kidding. Lisa, you were great.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, Arlene. Take care. Bye, Chong. I'm going to send out a survey through email, so look for that. Right?
Yeah.
Bye. Bye, everybody. All right, I'm going to close it down. You guys have a good night. Be well. Lower that blood pressure, not too much. Take care.